Hello, I'm Esther Gidu. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. The United Nations Children's Fund says hundreds of thousands of Sudanese children are likely to suffer from the worst form of malnutrition this year. UNICEF is also warning of famine in the Northeast African nation. U.S. President Joe Biden sharply criticizes Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's military campaign, which has killed more than 27,000 Palestinians. And in the wake of the Grammy Award's inaugural Best African Music Performance category, Heather Maxwell catches up with Jasen Emmons in Los Angeles to get an inside perspective. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. The United Nations Children's Fund says that hundreds of thousands of children in Sudan are likely to suffer from the worst form of malnutrition this year, including tens of thousands who could die. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
In the 10 months since fighting erupted between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces, the country's infrastructure has been devastated. The conflict has displaced millions of people within Sudan into nearby countries. The fighting is also prompting warnings of famine. James Elder, spokesperson for UNICEF, told a press conference in Geneva that children are likely to suffer from the deadliest form of malnutrition this year.
The largest displacement of children has been seen in Sudan. 4 million children have been displaced. That's just over 13,000 children displaced every single day for the past 300 days. Safety gone, worldly possessions gone, hope fading. Second, the consequences of the past 300 days mean that more than 700,000 children are likely to suffer the most dangerous form of malnutrition this year.
The conflict in Sudan is pushing the country's economy to its knees and is collapsing the healthcare sector. The UN High Commission for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, visited Sudan last week and met with internally displaced families, listening to their concerns and calling for further support from the international community.
It is important to reiterate our call, especially to the military leaders here in Sudan. They have to go back to peace talks. They have to go back to a meaningful peace track, at least starting with a ceasefire so that people can go back to their homes, the millions of those that have been displaced.
The United Nations is appealing for $840 million to help over 7.5 million children this year, and it's urging governments not to forget the civilians caught up in the war. Sudan is also appealing for $4.1 billion to meet their humanitarian needs and support those who have fled to neighboring countries. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
The military rulers of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso announced last month they were abandoning the economic community of West African states after the bloc pressured them to restore democracy. Timothy Obiezu has more.
The reason for the meeting was the announced exit of 3 of its members from the regional bloc. ECOWAS authorities admitted the bloc was stronger together and said they will continue to pursue dialogue with Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso in a bid to reverse their decision. The 3 nations last week withdrew from the regional bloc with immediate effect, according to a joint communique which accused ECOWAS of deviating from its founding principles and coming under the influence of foreign powers. But ECOWAS refuted the claims. President of the Commission, Omar Aliou Touré, addressed journalists.
There is no challenge before ECOWAS that cannot be addressed if we stay together, if we remain united. It is therefore my hope and aspiration to see us leave this hall today more united in purpose and in objectives. The 3 member states have not really reflected on the implications of this decision on the citizens.
The three countries also said the regional body failed to help member states struggling with insecurity, but instead imposed what they say are illegitimate and inhumane sanctions against military governments in the region. The meeting comes just days after thousands poured onto the streets in Senegal to protest the postponement by 10 months of the election that was initially due this month. The Senegalese National Assembly adopted the resolution extending President Macky Sall's tenure, and the country's foreign minister attended the ECOWAS meeting saying the developments in Senegal were trivial and didn't need ECOWAS's attention. But experts are calling it a constitutional coup and want ECOWAS to apply similar measures as it did in Niger. ECOWAS said the development in Senegal, easily considered as one of West Africa's strongholds for democracy, is worrying.
In our pursuit of solutions, we must remain committed to the principles of democratic governance and safeguarding the right of our people to freely elect their leaders. Our meeting here today provides us the opportunity to carefully assess the challenges presented by the decision of the military rulers of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger.
ECOWAS was created nearly 50 years ago to foster economic integration among member states. But in recent years, the bloc has struggled with a wave of coups, including in Mali, Burkina Faso, and the latest in Niger last July. Last year, these countries banded together after ECOWAS imposed heavy sanctions against Niger. They have also created a bloc known as the Alliance of the Sahel States. Experts are concerned these countries could be strengthening their partnerships with foreign authoritarian actors, but the three nations have vowed to take their destinies in their own hands. Timothy Obiezu, VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
China is actively pushing for a strong presence in the developing world with an eye on Africa, South America, and the Caribbean. The Asian giant is pursuing engagements on energy, digital infrastructure, and access to markets in those regions. For more on China's push to partner with Africa, South America, and the Caribbean, joining me from here in Washington is Paul Nantulia, a research specialist with the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Esther. Thank you for having me once again.
Now, China has deep interest in Africa for some time now, but how does it differ from its approach to South America and the Caribbean?
Well, it's China's engagements in Latin America and the Caribbean are really a mirror image of its engagements in Africa. It has a diplomatic structure known as the China CELAC Forum, CELAC standing for the Caribbean and Latin American countries, which is modeled after the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, or FOCAC. The Caribbean and Latin America side is younger than the African side. The China CELAC Forum was established in 2014. The FOCAC Forum has been around since 2000. There are quite a number of similarities in engagements, whether you look at the Confucius Institutes or economic development and other elements like security and defense. But there are also key differences, as you point out. One of those is on the economic side. The Caribbean and Latin American economies tend to be much more developed than their African counterparts. And I think that has given them more leverage in negotiating things like free trade agreements. There are about 6 Latin American countries that have successfully negotiated free trade agreements with the People's Republic of China. In Africa, it's only one country, that's Mauritius, although countries like Kenya have expressed interest. So I think the Latin American and Caribbean partners and their economies are much more diversified and much more developed than their African counterparts, have greater leverage, it seems to me, than their African partners.
Paul, in all of this, what does Africa stand to gain from China?
Africa stands a lot to gain in a number of areas. One obvious one is education. China, before COVID, was educating more African students and civilian professionals than any other industrialized country. So that is the one element. And 99% of these beneficiaries come back to the African continent. So there is a capacity building element there. African countries can also benefit. I mean, in terms of infrastructure, there's an infrastructure gap of over $2 billion a year, according to the African Development Bank. And so if infrastructure finance is used in a sustainable way, if countries are able to ensure that they protect themselves from odious debt, if they ensure that they have a greater oversight and accountability in negotiating debt with Chinese lenders, then the African continent can develop a lot. And I think there are examples of African countries that have been very, very skilled in negotiating with the Chinese lenders, and also on the Latin America side. So I think across the board, on both sides of the Atlantic, there's a lot of learning and sharing that African and Latin American counterparts can actually learn from each other.
Oh, very interesting. Good to hear of legal protection so they don't get into those mounting debts. Paul Nantulia is a research specialist with the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. The United States has killed a commander of an Iranian-backed militant group in a drone strike in Baghdad. VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Bob has the details.
Mourners screaming, "God is great," during the funeral of Kataib Hezbollah commander Wissam Mohammed Sabir al-Saidi, killed Wednesday in a late-night U.S. drone strike on a busy street in Baghdad. Since mid-October, Iran-backed Kataib Hezbollah has played a major role in the 168 militant attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, which injured more than 100 and killed 3 American troops.
If you attack, if you hurt our people, we know who you are and we will find you. And there will be a bill to pay, much greater than anything you inflict on us.
After days without an attack on U.S. bases, supporters of the militants are now vowing to retaliate for al-Saidi's assassination.
This deadly attack will be met with a response by popular movement and with a response from the Islamic resistance. There is no negotiation with the Americans and no solution except by targeting the bases of these people, these occupiers.
The White House says it fully respects Iraq's sovereignty and maintains a good relationship with the Iraqi government.
But look, if there were no attacks on our troops, who are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government, there would be no need for retaliatory strikes.
The U.S. has blamed Iran for supporting the militant groups, but the Pentagon says no Iranians were killed in the recent U.S. strikes. Carla Babb, VOA News, the Pentagon.
U.S. President Joe Biden is sharply criticizing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's military campaign, which, according to health officials in Gaza, has killed more than 27,000 Palestinians. President Biden responded to a reporter's question at the White House regarding the situation in Gaza, saying that he is, quote, pushing very hard to increase humanitarian assistance going into Gaza.
I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate. I talked to Bibi to open the gate on the Israeli side. I've been pushing really hard.
President Biden says he is also working very hard for a temporary ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages held by Hamas. Many reporters say covering the West Bank is always challenging, but since the October 7th Hamas terror attacks in Israel, journalists are facing more restrictions. VOA Celia Mendoza reports from Jerusalem.
Covering the West Bank has always had its challenges for Palestinian and Israeli journalists. But since the October 7 Hamas terror attack and Israel's counteroffensive, conditions are increasingly dangerous.
It's dangerous for all the journalists, not only for Al Jazeera journalists. But it seems that we are paying the high price because we are very active and we're trying to cover everything inside the Gaza, even in the dangerous areas.
Some journalists say reporting on the military operations by either side has always been restricted.
In general, it's challenging to cover military operations in the West Bank. In general, even before October 7th, especially for Palestinian journalists, but also for Israeli journalists. The Israeli journalists can hardly go into areas that are controlled by the Palestinian Authority.
Reporting from the West Bank possess a set of unique risks, including attacks by Israeli settlers and Israeli and Palestinian law enforcement.
I released the stickers that I am from my car because it is target for the Israeli army and it is target for the settlers to attack any car for press.
Before the latest conflict, Bakr had been criticized for his activism and anti-Israel comments. The Israeli government denies targeting journalists. A Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson told VOA via email that almost half of the journalists killed were actually terrorists. But the media watchdog, the Committee to Protect Journalists, has confirmed over 85 journalists killed in the first 4 months of the war, nearly all Palestinian. Free movement has also decreased in the region, with checkpoints and restrictions on access in the West Bank.
They targeting the Palestinian journalists, they will targeting also his family, and they will complicate the life for them.
Some Palestinian journalists are setting up emergency plans to help teams working under conflict conditions. For Israeli journalists, however, the focus is on the hostages Hamas still holds and the terror attack that left 1,200 dead. For Israeli media, says Saragusti, there is an expectation from audiences of patriotism in their coverage.
I can tell you that the audience really want the journalists to rally around the flag, and they don't want to see any criticism. They are not open and cannot contain any human stories coming from the other side. Now they cannot contain, too much details about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. They don't care. They don't want to hear about it. They're still very much concentrated on the devastation after October 7th.
That coverage differs from the international media. With the IDF controlling who can enter Gaza, those journalists are requesting independent access to report on the war. Celia Mendoza, VOA News, Jerusalem.
Still to come, introducing electric bikes in sub-Saharan Africa. We'll be right back.
Life's challenges can be viewed as opportunities to grow, learn, and be the best version of yourself. By looking inward, personal development increases your self-awareness, your self-esteem, and your chances to fulfill your aspirations. On this week's edition of Our Voices, we'll be joined by a life coach to explore the journey of personal development and how it can help you cultivate a mindset of success. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in
You are watching Africa 54 from the Voice of America headquarters here in Washington, D.C. In other news, aid organizations say civilians are increasingly facing bombings and thousands have been forced to flee and many have lost their children amid the chaos in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where new fighting between M23 rebels and pro-government forces erupted on Thursday. In his State of the Nation address, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says that an end to crippling power cuts is within reach, and he is pledging thousands of new jobs. Ramaphosa, 71, is facing an uphill battle to rally support behind the scandal-tainted African National Congress. And a California museum has returned 7 royal artifacts to Ghana's traditional Ashanti king to commemorate his silver jubilee in the first planned handovers of treasures looted during colonial times. The royal treasures from the Fowler Museum include a gold necklace, an ornamental chair, and an elephant tail whisk. With a growing concern over greenhouse gas emissions that are blamed for climate change, a Kenyan Dutch company is introducing electric bikes in sub-Saharan Africa for deliveries in urban areas to help reduce emissions. Juma Majanga reports from Nairobi.
Patrick Ambasu is making a delivery in Nairobi's Hurlingham neighborhood. Ambasu recently switched from a motorcycle to an electric bike. The father of 8 says the bike has not only improved his working conditions, but also increased his earnings.
Electric bikes have eased deliveries and transportation. It has significantly cut costs, like buying fuel for motorcycles. The bike has good speed and can go anywhere, even places a motorcycle can't go.
Motorcycle deliveries, called boda bodas, are common in Kenya. Last year, a Kenyan Dutch company, EB Africa, began selling electric bikes and electric cargo bikes in Kenya, Uganda and Rwanda for deliveries and commuting. In Kenya, the bikes cost between $580 and $740. EB says more than 800 delivery riders in Nairobi have switched so far. CEO Sten van der Ham says the aim is to accelerate the adoption of clean transport in sub-Saharan Africa to raise incomes and reduce environmental damage through emissions.
What we see is that the earning potential of the people who do last mile deliveries, especially on bodas, is quite low. It's quite expensive to operate a boda when you think about fuel, maintenance. An electric bicycle is 2 to 3 times more affordable. So we solve the affordability of the challenges around last mile deliveries. But also, of course, we contribute to cleaner cities, more livable cities, because there are no carbon emissions when you think about electric bicycles.
The e-bikes, designed and assembled in Kenya, are battery-powered with pedal assist motors with speeds of up to 32 kilometers per hour.
We recommend for riders to bring their bikes for service after 800-kilometer ride. So that's where we can see if the brakes need adjustment, if the gears shift properly, and if the motor runs according to the way it's supposed to.
As African cities continue to develop, EB's Van der Ham says creating bike lanes on roads and other infrastructure for non-motorized transport will be key to its uptake, resulting in many benefits.
So we want to have 1 million bicycles on the road, and through having so many bicycles, the impact on carbon emissions is huge. It will be 6.5 million kilograms of carbon we are going to avoid. But on top of that, there's also economical benefits because we're going to create more than 200,000 jobs as a consequence of having so many bikes on the road.
Experts say that a global move to electric mobility is essential to minimize climate change. And while e-bike transporters in Africa like Ambasu can count the benefits, infrastructural challenges still remain. Juma Majanga, VOA News, Nairobi.
The new category of Best African Music Performance produced its first winner at the recent 66th Annual Grammy Awards recently. Water by South Africa's Tyler took the trophy, beating out Asake and Olamide's Amapiano, Burna Boy's City Boys, Davido's Unavailable, and Ira Starr's Rush. Now, in the wake of the Grammy Awards, new investment in African music is a competitive category. Africa 54 entertainment reporter Heather Maxwell caught up with Jasen Emmons in Los Angeles to get an inside perspective on the matter.
Where do you see African music going in the Grammys, in the Grammy Museum, the Recording Academy, and then also just in, pop music on a global stage in general?
Yeah, I think African music is just going to get bigger and bigger. I think for many people, particularly in the United States, they may just be becoming more and more aware of it. Sunday night at the Grammys, that was the first time that an Afrobeats artist, Burna Boy, has performed on the Grammys, really a sort of a key moment. And they've put out a new award for that, Best African Music Performance, to note the fact that the genre is growing so much. So I think this is just the beginning of something that will be even on a larger global scale.
At the museum currently, is there anything that we can see of, say, Angelique Kidjo? She's won several Grammys. Or maybe Ladysmith Black Mambazo with Paul Simon decades ago. Is there anything that reflects those successes in the museum currently?
It pains me to say no, but that doesn't mean it won't happen in the near future.
I think you're right. I think it is going to happen in the near future.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, again, it's really important. More and more people are listening to it. And I think there's always, for our visitors, it's a hunger to sort of find new kinds of music to listen to. And I think that's part of the growth of African music, is people constantly looking for something new. And it's not that music is new. It's been around for quite a while now, but I think there's just a much greater awareness of it now.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier off camera that you and your daughter attended the Grammys. Did she or you find that the performance by Burna Boy and Tyla, their presence there was exciting?
Oh, incredibly exciting. Sitting in the audience, we were on the floor, and so seeing the musicians come out at first before they're on camera, it was intriguing us, the way that they were dressed, and then, seeing them live, really exciting. I mean, I think it's such a memorable moment for that genre, but also a great performance, both with Brandy and 21 Savage.
I think a lot of people were surprised that Tyla won, even though she deserves it. I mean, she's an amazing artist. Her music is terrific. Her performances are great. But I think a lot of people were expecting one of the other more veteran Afrobeats artists from Nigeria to win that. That seemed to be a pretty big shock for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the excitement of the Grammys, right? Like, you never really know if somebody will pull it off. And I think you could feel her own surprise and also thrill at winning it. I mean, she's only 22 years old.
I know.
Her first album hasn't come out yet, but that single is so good. Water is such a great song. It's so infectious. I'm not surprised she won, but seeing Jimmy Jam give her that award and the joy that she took in that moment was really, I thought, one of the highlights of the Grammys.
Oh, that's nice. Well, Jasen, it has been a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Heather, great talking to you.
Be sure to join Heather Maxwell's Entertainment Reports every Friday here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.